The stars were supposed to be beautiful. Soaring in the night like a symphony of distant lights, they were promises of faraway places, of adventures and mysteries yet to unfold. But as Captain Mason Kell and his crew found themselves stranded in the cold, dark expanse of the void, the stars were less enchanting and more like mocking specks of distant fire. Mason squinted through the thick viewports of the bridge of the Odyssey, a cutting-edge starcruiser, now hobbled in the void after an engine failure during a routine jump through hyperspace. The ship's systems were failing one by one, the hum of its engines a sickly wheeze that promised only an endless drift through the cold dark. There were no lights. No nearby stars. Just the endless black. "Captain, we're losing power in the auxiliary reactors," said Lieutenant Harper, her voice tight with stress as she leaned over the consoles, eyes darting across the failing systems. "At this rate, we'll be dead in the water within the hour." "I can see that, Lieutenant," Mason said, his fingers drumming on the armrest of his captain's chair. His face was set in a scowl, but the frustration behind his eyes wasn't just with the ship. It was with the universe itself. "Have we got any comms with command?" "No, sir. Everything's down." "We're off the grid completely," Harper replied, her gaze moving rapidly between screens that were all going dark. Mason's grip tightened on the armrests, but then he forced himself to take a breath, staring out into the emptiness. The Odyssey had been on a routine mission, no more significant than any other, and yet here they were, stranded. It was supposed to be a straightforward delivery of supplies to the outer colonies, just another dot in their logbook. Yet now, with the ship crippled and no way to call for help, the situation was far from simple. "All right, everyone," Mason began, pushing himself out of his chair, "this isn't a death sentence. We're going to make it." "Harper, what are our reserves looking like?" "Barely enough to keep life support running for a few days, Captain. We'll have food for maybe 24 hours, just basic rations, but if we don't get out of here soon, we're screwed." Mason finished the sentence for her, but without the usual bitterness. He had never been one to back down from a challenge. "Understood. Let's get some ideas." "Sykes, what's the status of the engines?" Sykes, the ship's chief engineer, was standing by one of the diagnostic panels, looking more annoyed than worried. He adjusted his glasses with a heavy sigh. "It's not good, sir. The fusion reactor's fried, and the auxiliary drives are barely functioning. I can try to jerry-rig something, but I'm not promising anything. We're going to need more than duct tape and spit to get us out of this." Mason nodded, turning away to pace the room. He was trying not to feel the panic rising in his chest. This wasn't his first time in a tight spot, but this felt different. This was deep space, no one could hear you scream out here. Worse, no one was even looking for them. They were a speck in the vast, uncaring void, isolated and alone. "We're not giving up yet," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Harper, see if you can get anything out of the comms. Sykes, get to work on the engines. I want something operational in the next hour, or we'll start using our reserve power to try and reboot everything manually. The rest of you, scour the ship. Anything useful, we use. Nothing gets wasted." The crew nodded and scattered, each member stepping into action with the quiet determination Mason had come to expect from them. They were a good crew. A solid crew. But even the best had their limits. This was no ordinary breakdown. The Odyssey wasn't just broken, it was helpless, drifting aimlessly in the middle of nowhere, and they were running out of time. Mason made his way to the observation window at the rear of the bridge, looking out at the vastness before him. Blackness stretched endlessly in all directions, stars twinkling far away like eyes watching from the abyss. Somewhere, out there, was home. Somewhere was Earth, the heart of the Federation, but it might as well have been a lifetime away. They had been out here for 6 months already on a routine mission, but now it felt like it had all been for nothing. "Captain," came a voice from behind, and Mason turned to see his second-in-command, Lieutenant Maria Vega, entering the bridge. Her usual calm composure was replaced with a rare crack of urgency in her eyes. "There's something you need to see. It's important." Mason nodded and followed Vega into the hallway, his boots echoing against the steel floor. She led him to the ship's central control room, where the lights were flickering on and off, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt circuits. Vega gestured to a screen in the corner of the room, and Mason's heart skipped a beat as he saw what it was displaying. "It's a ship," Vega said quietly, her voice tight. "A derelict one. It's drifting on an intercept course with us." Mason's eyes narrowed. "A derelict? How far?" "About 30 clicks off." "But Captain, the readings, they're not right. It's too quiet. Too still. I don't think this is some random wreckage." Mason's mind raced as he considered the possibilities. They were out here, stranded in the most remote part of the galaxy, and now a ship, another ship, was heading straight for them. It could be a rescue. It could also be the opposite. In this part of the galaxy, they'd learned never to assume anything was what it seemed. "All right," Mason said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Let's not jump to conclusions. Harper, Sykes, get your teams on the comms. Let's make sure this thing doesn't have any surprises waiting for us." Mason couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope buried beneath the layers of caution. A derelict ship could mean a number of things. Maybe it had supplies. Maybe it had the parts they needed to repair the Odyssey. But there was also the possibility it was a trap. A ship adrift, abandoned, could have been for any number of reasons: pirates, scavengers, worse. The longer he stood there, staring at the ship's signal coming through on their long-range sensors, the more the knot in his stomach tightened. For the first time since their arrival in this forsaken part of space, he realized that survival wasn't guaranteed. The tension was palpable as Mason turned back to Vega. "Prepare a team," he ordered. "We're going to investigate. But we proceed cautiously. No heroics." Vega nodded, and as she left to assemble a team, Mason looked back out at the stars. The infinite darkness seemed to mock him, its silence deafening. The ship, the Odyssey, might be their lifeline, but right now, it felt like a tomb. What if this derelict ship wasn't a sign of hope, but a harbinger of something worse? Mason took a deep breath, steeling himself. He had no choice but to move forward, no choice but to face whatever came next. The game had changed, and the stakes had just been raised. The ship drifted silently through the dark, its hull flickering faintly in the dim light of the distant stars. Captain Mason Kell stood at the helm of the Odyssey, his eyes fixed on the readouts from the long-range sensors. The derelict ship had been on an intercept course, but after a tense hour of monitoring, it had come no closer. It was as if the ship had stopped moving entirely, parked in place, its signal steadily transmitting but without any visible sign of life. Mason had his doubts, but with no other options, he'd given the order for a small team to investigate. The rest of the crew had been busy trying to keep the Odyssey from sinking into deeper distress. The only thing they had left was time, and the derelict ship might just be their ticket back to survival. Or, as Mason feared, it might be a trap. "Are we ready to move out?" Mason asked, breaking the silence. Lieutenant Vega, standing beside him, nodded. "Everything's set, sir. We've got our team in the shuttle, and we'll be taking a very cautious approach. Harper's patched us into the derelict's comms, but there's still no response." "Keep it that way," Mason said firmly. "We don't want to tip anyone off if there's something on board." The shuttle bay was alive with activity as Vega and her team prepared for the mission. They were a mix of the ship's best, Vega herself, of course, but also Sergeant Thomas, a burly soldier with years of experience in hostile environments, Dr. Callie Zhang, the ship's medical officer and expert in alien biology, and Yarrick Sykes, the ship's chief engineer, though this time, he would be wielding a rifle instead of his usual toolkit. Harper was already at the console, watching the shuttle's progress as it moved into position. "You're clear for departure, Captain," she reported. Mason exchanged a glance with Vega before stepping forward, his voice quiet but resolute. "All right, stay sharp. Remember, we don't know what we're walking into." With a final nod, the shuttle's doors closed, and the crew set off toward the unknown. The journey to the derelict ship was uneventful at first. The Odyssey loomed large behind them, its broken silhouette barely visible in the distance. The shuttle's engines hummed quietly, the small craft cutting through the dark void at a steady pace. Outside the window, the derelict ship seemed to pulse in the darkness, a strange and unnerving presence. It was an old vessel, a freighter of some kind, its hull marred by what appeared to be scorch marks, perhaps from weapons fire. The structure was worn down, battered by time and neglect, but the signals it was emitting were steady, almost as if it had been left in place deliberately. The shuttle's thrusters barely made a sound as it approached, but every vibration sent a shiver down Mason's spine. They were getting closer now, and he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Approaching docking port, Vega's voice came over the comms, cool and professional. "We're going to attempt manual docking. Brace yourselves." The shuttle rocked slightly as it neared the airlock of the derelict ship. There was a creak, the sound of metal on metal, and the shuttle settled against the aging ship with a low thud. Mason could almost hear the collective breath of the crew as the vessel came to a halt. "Airlock sealed. No immediate sign of intrusion or damage," Vega reported, her voice steady, but there was an edge to it, a sharpness that made Mason's nerves stand on end. "We're clear to board." The team moved quickly, securing their gear and checking their weapons. Sykes, though an engineer, always carried a pulse gun. Something about the engineer's past made him ready for combat if need be. Mason noted the tight grip on his weapon as the team formed up, heading toward the airlock. The moment the hatch hissed open and the team stepped onto the derelict ship, the smell hit them first. It wasn't the usual sterile, recycled air of a Federation ship. This was something older, mustier, with an undertone of decay. It smelled like something had been left to rot. The hallway beyond the airlock was dimly lit, with flickering overhead lights casting long shadows on the walls. A cold chill hung in the air, and the floors creaked with every step. "Looks like no one's been here for a while," said Sergeant Thomas, his voice low as he scanned the dark passage ahead. "Too quiet for comfort." Mason didn't respond, his eyes narrowing as he looked around. The ship was eerily silent. There were no crew members in sight, no signs of life. Even the usual hum of active systems was missing. They were truly alone on this ship, drifting through space. Vega led the way, her eyes scanning every corner, every door. "Stay alert," she murmured. "We don't know what we're dealing with here." They moved cautiously, footsteps muffled on the metal floors. Every door they passed was sealed shut, its panels worn and scratched, but without any signs of forced entry. It was almost as if the crew had simply vanished. "Captain, I'm picking something up," Dr. Zhang called from the back of the group. She was examining a terminal that had been half buried under debris. "There's a faint signal here, a distress call that looks like it was sent in the last day or so. It's weak, but it's definitely recent." "Let me see," Mason ordered, stepping over to her. As he leaned over the terminal, the light flickered, casting a brief shadow across his face. The distress message was barely legible, the words distorted by static. "Help, escape, can't." He couldn't make sense of the rest. The message ended abruptly, the screen going dark just as suddenly as it had lit up. "Do you think someone's still alive on board?" Sykes asked, his voice edged with disbelief. "I don't know," Mason said slowly, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "But we need to find out. Keep moving." The team continued through the darkened ship, their steps careful, their hearts pounding in their chests. The more they explored, the more they realized something was wrong, something deeply wrong. It wasn't just the silence. It was the feeling that the ship was watching them. Every time they passed another sealed door or empty hallway, it felt like they were being herded, like they were walking deeper into a trap. The tension was growing, and even the normally unflappable Vega was starting to show signs of unease. Every corner they turned seemed to lead to another dead end, and the deeper they went, the colder the air seemed to get. Mason had been in enough dangerous situations to know that when things felt too quiet, it was only a matter of time before the situation exploded. And just as he was about to give the order to fall back, there was a sudden sound, faint but distinct. A scrape. from somewhere deep within the ship. "Did anyone hear that?" Mason asked, his voice tight. The team froze. Even Sergeant Thomas, who had seen his fair share of dangerous situations, was suddenly alert, his hand tightening on his rifle. Another scrape, followed by a low growl. It was coming from the next corridor. "Vega," Mason said quietly, "take the lead." Without hesitation, Vega drew her weapon and moved forward, the rest of the team falling in line behind her. It was time to find out just what had made that sound. The scrape echoed again, reverberating through the hollow corridors of the derelict ship. The sound was faint but unmistakable, coming from just around the corner, like something, or someone, was dragging its way through the ship. Mason's heart raced in his chest as he motioned for the team to move forward with extreme caution. Vega, her weapon raised, was the first to step around the corner, her gaze scanning the dimly lit hallway. The others followed, rifles and pulse guns aimed, the air thick with the weight of tension. Each step felt like a drumbeat in their ears. The corridor before them was lined with more doors, most of them sealed, but there was one door at the end, slightly ajar, the soft creak of metal as it swayed with the ship's movement. Another scrape. It was closer this time. They were getting near. Mason's mind was racing. Was it a survivor? Was it something worse? The distress call they had intercepted, was it a warning, or a trap set by something or someone to lure them deeper into the ship? Vega, now leading the way, motioned for the team to spread out slightly. She stepped forward slowly, every muscle in her body tense with anticipation. "Stay sharp," she murmured. They approached the open door, the scraping noise growing louder with each passing second. There was something behind it, something, someone, alive, perhaps. Mason leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he signaled for Vega to check the room. She nodded, and with one swift movement, she ducked inside, her rifle raised. The others followed immediately behind, the moment of uncertainty hanging heavy in the air. The door swung open wider with a groan of protest, revealing a darkened room beyond. At first, there was nothing. Just the empty, decaying remnants of what once must have been a storage room or cargo bay. Old crates, wires strewn across the floor, and the faint smell of something rancid. But then, a low growl, almost like a growl of frustration, broke the silence. "Move!" Vega snapped, darting into the room with military precision, rifle aimed at the source of the sound. Mason's heart pounded. Was it a person, disoriented and on the edge of survival? Or was it something far worse? He saw it before Vega did. At the far end of the room, a large shadow slithered along the floor, moving quickly, its body undulating in a way that no human could. It wasn't just a figure, it was something far more dangerous. "Get back!" Mason yelled, his voice ringing out as he drew his own weapon. The thing lunged forward with a speed that was almost unreal. It was a mass of tangled limbs, some human, others animal-like, with patches of scaly skin that seemed to ripple and shift. Its face was a grotesque mixture of human features and something else entirely, half-rotted, half-living. Vega fired first, her shots ringing out in quick succession. The creature screamed, an unearthly wail that sent shivers down Mason's spine, but it didn't slow down. Instead, it surged forward, knocking crates and debris aside with terrifying strength. It wasn't alone. The room erupted into chaos. From the shadows behind the first creature, more figures began to emerge, more twisted, deformed shapes. Some of them looked almost human, but the others were worse, alien, their bodies contorted in unnatural ways, limbs elongated, and eyes glowing with hunger. "Not human," Sykes gasped, his voice shaking as he fired at the nearest creature. "None of them are human." Mason's mind raced. There was no way they were dealing with ordinary survivors. This was something else. Something far darker. These were not the remnants of a crew lost to time, they were something new, something horrifying. The way they moved, the way they attacked, they were predators, and they were closing in fast. "Fall back!" Mason shouted, his hand going to the comms. "Harper, we need backup. Now!" The team fired relentlessly, but the creatures didn't relent. They swarmed, moving with terrifying speed, their growls and screeches echoing through the ship's halls. One of the creatures lunged for Dr. Zhang, its taloned hands reaching out to tear at her. But Sergeant Thomas, ever vigilant, fired his pulse gun at the beast, striking it in the chest and sending it tumbling to the ground with a sickening thud. "Dr. Zhang, get back!" Thomas yelled, pulling her out of the creature's reach. Another figure lunged at Vega, but she was quicker, her rifle snapping up and sending another burst of energy into the thing's chest, sending it tumbling back, its body convulsing in the air before it hit the ground, dead. But there were more coming, and Mason knew they couldn't hold their ground much longer. They needed to get out of here. "Head to the shuttle," Vega yelled. "Now!" The team moved as one, retreating down the corridor as the creatures surged after them, screeching, crawling, and leaping toward their prey. Mason's mind was on fire with decisions, each one more frantic than the last. Their only way out was the shuttle. "Harper, are you seeing this?" Mason called out, his voice frantic. "Seeing it, Captain. I'm trying to get you a clean shot to the shuttle bay, but it's not easy." Harper's voice crackled over the comms. The crew reached the hallway leading to the shuttle, their path illuminated by the flashing lights of their own weapons. The creatures were right behind them now, and they were getting closer. The faint sound of skittering footsteps mixed with the growls filled the air, pushing Mason and his team to move faster. "We're not going to make it," Sykes shouted, glancing over his shoulder, his pulse gun still firing at anything that moved. His face was pale, sweat slicking his brow. "We have to make it," Mason said grimly, pushing his team forward. His mind was calculating the distance, the time. The shuttle wasn't far, but the creatures were relentless, and they were gaining ground. "Move, move!" Vega urged, shoving a crate into the path of one of the creatures that tried to leap for her. Mason felt his pulse quicken. They were almost there. Almost out. But just as they reached the airlock that would lead them to the shuttle bay, a creature lunged, blocking their path. It was bigger than the others, its mouth a jagged line of teeth, its eyes burning with hunger. It screeched, a sound that split the air, and threw itself at Mason. Without thinking, he pulled his weapon to his side and fired. The creature roared in pain, but it didn't stop. It came at him faster, its claws outstretched. In that moment, Mason knew what he had to do. He grabbed a nearby piece of debris, a metal bar that had been knocked loose from one of the walls, and swung it at the creature with everything he had. The bar connected with the side of its head with a sickening crunch, and the creature staggered back. But it wasn't enough. With one final scream, the creature launched itself at Mason, its claws swiping for his throat. Everything slowed down, and Mason saw the end coming for him. And then, a shot rang out. The creature froze, its body jerking before it collapsed to the ground in a heap. Vega stood behind him, her pulse gun still smoking, eyes locked on the fallen creature. "Get to the shuttle," she said, her voice low and controlled. They didn't need another word. They ran. The shuttle doors slammed shut behind them with a final, metallic thud. The moment they were inside, the entire crew of the Odyssey moved with frantic precision. The engines hummed to life, and Harper's voice crackled through the comms, her voice clear but laced with urgency. "Captain, get us out of here. I've got the course plotted, but you need to punch it now." Mason didn't hesitate. His fingers flew over the console, his mind still racing with the events that had just unfolded. The creatures, the nightmarish things they had encountered, were still out there, somewhere in the bowels of the derelict ship. But it was the strange, overwhelming sense of relief that surged within him as the shuttle began its acceleration that brought him back to the present. "Everyone, hold on," Mason commanded, his voice steady but strained as he powered the shuttle's engines. He could feel the weight of his decision now. Leaving the derelict ship had been their only option, but he wasn't certain whether it was the right one. Whatever had been happening on that ship, it wasn't over. The fact that those things had been alive after all this time was a mystery, and Mason knew they hadn't seen the last of them. The shuttle's engines roared, and they were off, rocketing away from the dead hulk of the derelict ship. The stars outside the window streaked past as they shot into open space, a temporary safety, but not for long. It was only a matter of time before whatever had been unleashed on that ship followed them. Inside the shuttle, the team remained silent for a few moments, everyone catching their breath and checking themselves. Vega's eyes were narrowed as she scanned the cockpit's readouts. "Harper, where's the Odyssey?" she asked. "It's right where we left it," Harper replied. "Still in the same position. No sign of movement from the derelict, but I'm monitoring everything." Mason exhaled, his fingers pressing against his temples. "We need to be sure. We can't assume we're out of danger just yet. We'll need to get back to the ship and regroup, but we have to prepare for..." Suddenly, the shuttle shuddered. Mason's head snapped up, and his pulse shot into overdrive. "What was that?" he barked. Harper's voice came through the comms, sharp with alarm. "Captain, we're being followed. There's a massive energy signature behind us. It's coming from the derelict." Vega's expression darkened. "That thing's chasing us." "Stay calm," Mason said, his voice lower now, as if trying to force himself into clarity. "Harper, take us in. We're heading back to the Odyssey. Vega, get on the comms with the crew. Prepare them for a possible boarding action." The shuttle rocked again as another violent tremor rippled through the vessel. "We're not going to outrun them," Thomas muttered, staring at the readouts. "There's no way the shuttle can go fast enough if they're coming for us." Mason felt his chest tighten as the truth of their situation sunk in. They had barely escaped the derelict ship, but if something was now following them, a ship, or worse, there was nowhere to hide. They were outgunned, and there was no clear way to stop whatever it was that had attacked them in the first place. But there was one thing Mason knew for sure. They couldn't afford to just wait and see what happened. "Vega, Sykes, get to the weapons systems. We're going to need every advantage we can get," Mason ordered, his voice resolute. "Thomas, I want you on tactical. If we have to make a stand, you'll be in charge of strategy." The team moved without a word, instinctively falling into their positions. Mason felt the weight of the responsibility press down on him, but he couldn't afford to falter now. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting to understand what had happened on that ship and how to stop it from spreading. Outside, the dark expanse of space loomed before them, vast and unforgiving, but Mason's focus was entirely on the path ahead. There was no time for hesitation, no time for second-guessing. They had to finish this. The energy signature behind them grew stronger, closer, until Mason could almost feel the intensity of it through the ship's hull. Whatever had followed them wasn't just a mindless predator, it was intelligent, capable, and seemingly relentless. "We're going to make it back to the Odyssey," Mason muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But his voice lacked certainty now. As the shuttle shot closer to the Odyssey, the sense of impending doom grew heavier. The Odyssey was still there, its massive frame a silhouette against the starry backdrop, but now it seemed so distant, so vulnerable. Was the ship truly safe from whatever was chasing them? Was there any way to stop this madness from spreading? The shuttle was almost within range when the comms buzzed to life, Harper's voice sharp with warning. "Captain, it's not the derelict. It's something else," she said. Her voice wavered with uncertainty. "I'm getting another energy signature. It's coming from ahead of us." Mason's stomach dropped. "Ahead? What do you mean?" Harper's voice was quiet for a moment. "It's another ship. And it's moving fast." "Shit," Vega muttered. "More of them." Mason gritted his teeth. He should have known it was never going to be this easy. "Bring us in closer," he ordered. "We need to get to the Odyssey and secure the area." As the shuttle closed the distance between itself and the Odyssey, the new ship appeared in the viewports. It was a sleek, dark vessel, far more advanced than anything the Federation had ever encountered. The hull was gleaming, as if it had been made for speed and efficiency, with long, curved edges that made it look almost organic. It wasn't an attack ship, it was something more sinister, more alien. "Do we know who they are?" Mason asked, eyes narrowing. No way to tell, Harper replied. We haven't seen ships like this in any Federation database. But they're coming in hot, Captain. We need to make a decision. For a moment, there was silence. Mason knew that whatever this was, whatever they were facing, it was far beyond anything they'd encountered before. But the Odyssey was their last hope. The only way they could survive was to defend it. If they didn't, the creatures that had attacked them would take the ship, and then who knew what would happen? Vega, Mason said, his voice hardening, get us back inside. Thomas, prepare for boarding action. If they're hostile, we fight. The shuttle lurched as it veered toward the Odyssey, but as Mason prepared for the worst, something unexpected happened. The alien ship halted, just outside the range of the Odyssey. It hung there, motionless, as if waiting. We've got incoming communication, Harper reported. On screen, Mason ordered. The image flickered to life, revealing a dark figure standing in front of an alien console. The figure's face was partially obscured by a helmet, but its voice, cold, commanding, and unmistakably intelligent, spoke in a language Mason had never heard. We are the Zilver. You have trespassed, the figure said, its tone devoid of emotion. But you are not our target. You will leave, or we will take your vessel. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mason felt something stir in him, resolve. Whatever these creatures were, whatever their intentions were, the Odyssey was his ship. And he would not back down. We don't intend to leave, Mason said, his voice steady, and you're not taking our ship. The figure on the screen paused for a long moment before responding. Then prepare to face the consequences. The message ended, leaving the crew in an uneasy silence. Mason looked at his team, each of them resolute, ready. They had come this far. Now, it was time to fight. And they would fight to the end.